Water changes. You're not going to spend longer than 5 minutes in this hobby before you start seeing all these people talking about how important they are to keeping a healthy aquarium. But why? What do water changes do? How much water do we take out? How often do we have to do them? And what do we use to do it? Hey folks, it's John with KeepFishKeeping.com, and today I'm going to answer all of those questions and more. This is a dummy's guide to water changes. So what's the point with water changes? What are we accomplishing when we do them? Well, I want you to think about what's going on in your aquarium. The whole point behind getting a fish tank is, well, having fish in there swimming around, and when we have live fish in our tank, we're going to need to feed them. When we feed them, they're going to poop. This poop doesn't have any way of leaving our aquarium. It just sinks to the bottom and gets stuck behind a rock, or some of it might even get sucked up by the filter. As all of this poop accumulates, it's going to start to rot. And when it does, it creates ammonia in the tank. Fortunately, nature takes care of that ammonia and converts it to nitrate. Nitrate isn't an instant killer of fish, but when it gets high enough, it certainly can. See, nitrates aren't just there. The more food you put in the tank, the more the fish are going to eat it, the more they're going to poop, the more there's going to be ammonia, which is converted to nitrates, and that nitrate is going to keep elevating and keep getting higher and higher and higher. And eventually, if it gets too high, it can definitely kill your fish. So what we're doing when we perform water changes is we're removing water that contains nitrates and replacing that with good, clean water. This new water mixes with the water that's still left in your tank and dilutes those nitrates even farther. Let me just show you in a way that makes more sense. Let's say you test your water and you find out you have 0 ammonia, 0 nitrites, and your nitrates are at 30 parts per million. And you know this means it's time to do a water change. We'll talk more about that in the next segment, but you place your siphon hose in the tank to vacuum out the gravel real good, and you remove 50% of the water. The water that's still left in the aquarium still has the 30 parts per million of nitrates in it. Now, when you add the new clean water that has no nitrates in it at all, it's going to not only fill the tank back up again, but that water that has no nitrates in it is also going to mix with the existing water, causing the nitrates to dilute even further. Now, I know better than to do math in a video, but in theory, this should dilute the nitrates down to about half what they were when you started. So you had 30 parts per million when you started, you did a 50% water change, and that brought them down to 15 parts per million. This is the whole point to doing water changes. It's to remove dirty water containing nitrates, which, if they're high enough, can be lethal for your fish, and replacing it with good, clean water, making the environment much more healthy. I guess if I want to be gross, I could just explain it like this. Your fish are swimming around in their own toilet and the toilet of their tank mates. Doing a water change is like flushing the toilet. I'm sorry to put that image in your head, but hey, if you look at the positive side of it, now you're going to be much more motivated to go in there and do water changes. If you were to ask 50 fish keepers how often you should be doing water changes, you'd probably get 50 different answers. But you know what? We're not going to complicate things here because this is a dummy's guide to water changes. We're going to use some common sense. Like we just discussed, water changes are to help control nitrates to keep the water healthy for your fish. So the common sense answer to this is we do water changes when our nitrates are elevated. Or we do water changes when we need to do water changes. How do we know when nitrates are elevated? Well, it's real easy. We use the first thing you should have bought to go with your aquarium, and that's your master test kit. Wait, you don't have a master test kit? Okay, you're gonna need to pause this video right now and go get one or order one. However you have to do it, you have to do it. You need a test kit that's gonna test for pH, ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. It doesn't have to be a master test kit. I know those are kind of expensive, but even if it's the dippable test strips, that's fine. You need something to be able to test your water. Now that you have your test kit, you're gonna wanna test regularly to get an idea of what your aquarium's doing. The thing is, every aquarium is different. and the levels are affected by what you have and what your habits are. Someone who has a 10-gallon aquarium with 1 fish in it is going to test very differently than that same tank with 10 fish in it. So there's no definitive answer here. Another thing that'll affect your water is your feeding habits. Again, someone who feeds a small amount once a day is going to have very different test results than someone who has 10 fish and feeds twice a day. So when you're testing your water every single day, you're going to keep an eye on those nitrates and you're going to see when it gets to an unhealthy level. And that is when you do a water change. So what's an unhealthy level? Well, again, that depends on who you talk to, but I like to keep them between 5 and 15 parts per million. So for the sake of this conversation, let's average it out to 10. If your aquarium is testing at 10 parts per million nitrates, you're safe. So let's say you do a nice big water change on a Saturday, and after you're done, you test your water and it's around 5 parts per million of nitrates. You go about your normal routine and test it again the following Saturday, and it's just a little higher, but nothing crazy, so you just keep going. You test again the next Saturday and it's up around 10, and then the Saturday after that, it's up around 20 to 30. This is telling you that with your habits, with your routine, after a week, things were fine. After 2 weeks, they were starting to get a little squirrely, and after 3 weeks, they were definitely high, so you know you need to do a water change about every 3 weeks. The reason I explain it like this is because there's a lot of fish keepers out there that are on a routine of doing water changes every single week. There's certainly nothing wrong with this routine, and your fish are going to absolutely love it, but by doing all the tests and knowing what your water's doing, you know that if you have a wedding to go to and you miss a week of water changes, you know everything's going to still be okay. And also, if you're someone that wants to do as little work possible, you know that you can go at least 2-3 weeks between water changes and everything's going to be fine. The bottom line is your aquarium is going to tell you when you need to do water changes, not the rule book and not your friends online. And not even me. So to answer how much water you need to take out in each water change, we got to go right back to what we were just talking about. The answer is going to totally depend on your habits and what your test kit says. This is where you're going to want to do some experimenting. Remember when I talked about testing regularly to get an understanding of how your water is working? Well, we're going to want to do the same thing with this and make changes based on what the test result says. If you test your water and it's at 30 parts per million, and you change about 10% of the water, and the nitrates only go down to 25, you'll know you need to do more. Same thing goes for if you do a 75% water change and it wipes the nitrates out completely, you know you could maybe do a little less and still get away with it. Or you could be one of those lucky people that does a 10% water change and your nitrates go down to 5 parts per million. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on your habits, what you're feeding your fish, how many fish you have, and how often you're doing maintenance. I mean, I've got tanks in my collection that I do water changes on about once a month, and I do 50%, and that keeps nitrates at a manageable level. Just listen, test, test, and test again, and your test results are going to tell you what you need to do. Okay, we've been talking all this time about taking water out. What about the new water that we put in? Do we need to do anything special with that? Yes. I'm going to make my first controversial statement right now in this video, and that is that when you're adding water to your aquarium, you need to add water conditioner. I don't want to hear, I'm on a well, I don't need water conditioners, or I've been doing water changes for 5 years without using water conditioner and my fish are all fine. Just because you're deciding to do it wrong doesn't mean you need to share it on YouTube like you're some rebel that does the opposite of what everyone else says. Save yourself and the people reading comments some time, because at the end of the day, I hate to hurt your feelings, but no one cares. Here's the thing. No matter what brand you use, water conditioners remove chlorine and chloramine, ammonia and heavy metals like copper, lead, and arsenic from the water. Your well water might not have chlorine in it, but there's a good chance it has other stuff that can be just as harmful for the fish. Don't be stupid. Use water conditioners. The main thing you need to consider if you're on city water is the reason they put chlorine in the water is to kill bacteria and make it safe for us to consume. Chlorine can certainly be harmful for fish, but that's not all. Like we discussed a couple weeks ago, your aquarium has bacteria in it that the fish need to survive. If you're filling up your tank with water that has a chemical in it that kills bacteria, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I guess if you're one of those people that has one of those sophisticated water treatment systems that cleans the water so far that it's almost distilled, I guess you'll be fine. But for us normal people, we need to use water conditioners. As far as temperature goes, it's pretty simple. Try to get the water you're adding to the tank to be as close in temperature as the existing water. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Doing a water change is not complicated at all. It's taking water out of your aquarium and putting water back in. How you do that is going to be totally dependent on your budget and your back. When most people start in this hobby, they use a siphon hose to remove the water and drain it into a bucket. Once that bucket is full, they dump it in the yard, down the toilet, or if they really want to spice things up, they water your plants with it. This is one of the best natural fertilizers you'll ever find. Tell you a fun little story. When Lisa and I had 127 tanks in our garage, like 3 houses ago, we didn't have time to mess around with buckets and all that stuff. So we would take a long hose and we would drain our tanks straight out of the building and down the driveway. The water would run down the driveway and drain into the grass. And I just got to tell you, that one patch of grass where the water landed was the prettiest grass you've ever seen. The rest of the yard was crap, but that part? Another option is to use what, in my opinion, is the best invention to ever hit the aquarium hobby, and that's the Python water changing system. This is not a sponsored video, folks. I just know how impactful this product has been on my tanks, and I feel it's my duty to tell all of you about it. This is a system that hooks to your sink and gets the siphon going, and instead of the water draining into a bucket, it goes right down your drain. And the cool thing is, once you're done removing the water, you can flick a switch and use that same hose to refill your tanks. There's no more carrying buckets around. At my age and with my back, that is a beautiful thing. And let me tell you something, the easier it is for you to do water changes, the more likely you are to do them all the time, and your tank will never look better. So there you go. Now you know why we do water changes. You know how often to do them and how much water to take out during each water change. Let me tell you something, folks. There is nothing more rewarding than to spend a little bit of time vacuuming out the gravel, getting that old nasty water out, putting new water back in, and taking a step back and seeing how gorgeous the tank looks and how happy the fish are. I'm going to tell you, that is one of the most rewarding moments in this hobby. You just look at it and you say, wow. Work is work. I get that. I mean, most people don't want to do any work, but I will tell you, most fish keepers will tell you that the work is part of the fun. I mean, it's therapeutic. And again, in the end, you feel so much better. You just look at it and you're so proud of what you've done. I know it sounds silly, but if you're a fish keeper, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a beautiful thing. I don't know what else to tell you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been so much fun to do. And until I see you again, take care.